Hey everyone, Bruce Eckfeldt here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe and turn on notifications so we can let you know when the next video is posted. You can also check us out at eckfeldt.com for more great content. With that, let's go check out the video.
You're listening to Scaling Up Services, where we speak with entrepreneurs, authors, business experts, and thought leaders to give you the knowledge and insights you need to scale your service-based business faster and easier. And now, here is your host, business coach Bruce Eckfeldt.
Welcome everyone, this is Scaling Up Services. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt, I'm your host. Our guest today is Andrew Vasylyk, who is founder at StartupSoft, and we're going to find out a little bit more about the company and his background in the startup environment, learn a little bit what he's doing with investment and services. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bruce. Glad to be here.
So why don't we talk a little bit about your background before we get into StartupSoft and kind of what you're doing with the service model. How do you get into tech? How do you get into startups? What was your background?
Yeah, so I got into startups about 5 years ago with my brother. We were in the middle of university studying psychology, so it was kind of a pre-dentistry program. And somewhere, I think second year for me, we caught the startup bug. We had a bunch of ideas that we wanted to work on. Yeah, and then it pretty much got to a point where we had to either choose startup life or continue with education, and we chose startups. So we ran through a couple of ideas, and yeah, we've done non-tech and tech things. One of the, I guess, non-tech companies that we had was similar to cannabis. It was in the electronic cigarette world. At that point, cannabis wasn't legalized yet, but we had some plans of kind of getting into the cannabis space, knowing that it was such a huge kind of black market at that time, but it was going to become a non-black market. So now we're StartupSoft, and it's a service-based business, which is a totally different world than what we're used to, but it's still to some degree a startup.
Yeah. And what prompted focusing on this need, or I guess what was the problem that you saw that you said, wow, if we could solve this, that could be a really good business?
So it was a personal problem for my brother and I. We're both non-technical, and if you're not a technical founder, you have an idea, you want to get it off the ground. How do you do that? You talk to mentors and you talk to investors and whoever, and everybody gives you the textbook answers. You got to get a tech co-founder. The reality of the situation is a lot more complicated. It's not easy to find a tech co-founder, and it's not very difficult to find a good tech co-founder. So what ends up happening for a lot of startups is they go offshore. They end up outsourcing, and most of them get burnt. So it's not the best thing in the world to outsource an MVP, and we had some pretty bad experiences ourselves. So we saw that this was a problem that we had. We assumed a lot of other entrepreneurs had it, and that's a problem that we wanted to go after. At that point, we didn't really know exactly how we would kind of tackle this problem, but we had some kind of personal experiences with it. So we had a start, and then we kind of started off from that.
Yeah. So I see that a lot. I got a lot of folks come to me saying, hey, do you know any technical co-founders? Everyone's searching for their technical co-founder, it seems like these days. And why do you think that is? Give us a sense of your kind of assessment of the kind of market challenges or the market problems that leads to this lack of technical folks that can help in the early stages of companies.
Well, I think, startups at their core are very risky ventures, especially in the early days. Getting involved as a co-founder, technical, non-technical, is very little chance of any sort of payoff. Yeah. So most people, if you have two offers on the table, one is for a normal job where you're getting paid and stable, and the other one is a startup. Unless you're crazy passionate about the startup, you're probably going to choose a regular job. Yeah. So I think that's one reason. Another reason is lack of network. If it's your first, second venture and you haven't had any big successes or don't have a huge network, then it's not really that easy to convince people to join something at such an early stage.
Yeah. I think those are both very true. I think that kind of access to the market is a huge one. I certainly see, not to overcharacterize, but I do find that most technical folks are not super strong networkers. So being able to kind of get out there and get access to some of these offers or these opportunities is a bit of a challenge, or at least getting enough of them that you feel like you're making a good decision. You may find things come across your desk, but knowing that you're looking at lots of different offers and you're actually choosing the right one for you is hard. But yeah, certainly the kind of the lack. I know in New York here, it's kind of this combination of lack of talent and also the competition for talent, and we've got a huge financial banking industry here that tends to suck up all the high-end talent and happens to pay them stupidly high salaries in terms of full-time jobs. So it's particularly hard in places like this. In terms of the offshoring, I see this happen a lot. I guess, what do you see as the kind of typical pattern when people say, all right, well, I can't find a technical co-founder, So I'm going to go it my own. I'm going to find an offshore team to work with. Where are they typically going? What are the options that you see most of these kind of non-technical folks have in terms of finding a development team to help them in the early stage?
You have a couple options. The two big ones is freelancers. So going on platforms like Upwork or, 10 years ago it was called Elance. The other option would be working with dev shops. So a firm that can actually give you teams, and they tend to be more expensive, but usually are better options than freelance, usually are safer options, than freelancers. It's from what we've seen from our experience as kind of being on both sides of the table as clients as well as service providers, is there's a pretty big mismatch of interest with service providers and startups. If you're a very, very early stage founder, one, you don't have a lot of money. So you're not going to go with a top freelancer on Upwork. You're not going to go with a top firm in India or in Eastern Europe. That on its own, it's not hard to see how that could lead to a pretty poor experience or a bad product. The other side is that the interest of a founder is to build a big company, and the interest of a dev shop, or the interest of, I would say, usually a dev shop, but in some cases a freelancer as well, is to get as much money out of the relationship as possible. So there's a pretty big mismatch of interest there. So what we ended up doing is we came up with a pretty, I don't want to say crazy innovative, but it was a pretty effective model for us, where we took discounts, and then the difference between whatever the market rate is, we give discounts, the difference between whatever the market rate is that we actually charged, we took an equity. So what that did for us is it gave us vested interest, as well as allow people to work with more experienced designers and developers while still having the same budget. So it was a pretty simple but effective solution for us, and it resonated with people pretty well. I mean, it's worked pretty well for us.
And what services, I guess, were you originally focused on that you focus on now? When you say you're providing these services, what exactly are you helping these early stage entrepreneurs with in terms of the development side?
So it's end to end. We started off with, from kind of a target audience perspective, with very, very early stage people. So people that just have an idea on a napkin, they're not technical, they want to get it off the ground. They're not necessarily looking for service providers. They're looking for more of a partner-like relationship. So we offer them end-to-end tech solution, anything from design to development to QA to project management to get an MVP off the ground. And we also have additional kind of value-added services of mentorship, so we can connect them with mentors if they're struggling with the marketing or maybe some other piece of the business, as well as helping them raise capital. So connecting them with investors that we think might potentially be interested in putting in cash. And we do that because, one, we want them to succeed, and another is because it also makes financial sense for us as well.
You have equity now, right? I mean, if you're
equity,
taking this equity position. So let's dig into that equity calculation a little bit, just as I'm curious in how you've kind of structured it and how you think about it. So you basically say that we'll take a market rate, we'll agree on a market rate for these services. You then discount those services some percentage. I'm kind of curious how much, but that delta you basically treat as a equity investment, like a cash investment on an equity position in the company. I have that kind of formula right, or the concept right?
Yeah, it's pretty much it, and that's pulled into a note typically because it's such an early stage, and then whenever they go out to raise money, then it gets converted.
So it's like I say, if you're basically just saying you're taking that amount and saying we're not gonna value it yet, but it will convert into equity when you do your next round at whatever valuation happens at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, how did you come up with market rate? I mean, what's your having done this a couple of times myself, there's always sort of the concept, and then you end up negotiating what is market rate. Where do you provide your services from and stuff? How did you do? Where are your teams, and then what's the market rate that you're kind of pinning to?
Yeah, the market rate is something that's not, like you said, sometimes it can get down to negotiations. There's no clear-cut market rate for something. Typically, is we look at the team that's involved in the project. We look at what the salary of that team would be in the market, and then we take a look at how much into our profit margins we can dig into, and then the delta is what gets put into the note.
Okay, so the delta, I guess, one of my general rules was always, I'm happy to put profit at risk, but it's hard for me to put hard costs at risk. Meaning, if the service I'm delivering is a $50,000 service and the salaries that I'm paying are $25,000 out of overhead of 10, I can put $15,000 at risk in terms of converting that into something either on a performance bonus, outcome bonus or equity level. But it's hard for me to forego paying rent. It's harder for me to forego paying salaries out of my pocket for those cases. How did you, I guess, where were your lines, or how did you approach the sort of internal calculation of the amount that you could put at risk?
Yeah, for us, it's usually only profit that we dig into.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of cases where we help folks out and we cover the salaries of the developers ourselves. Mm-hmm. Usually it's too risky, and it's very rarely has it actually worked out like you want it to work out. So just like you said, profit is something that we can actually afford to dig into, but as far as salaries, it's something that we try to avoid.
Yeah. I guess any other terms or structure you put around things? Like I certainly found like how long we were doing this for, the kind of the scope, time frame, things like that ended up coming into play. How did you deal with those sort of factors when you cut these deals with clients?
If it's a fixed cost, then it's a lot easier. Like if we look at for example, to build an app would cost $50K, but we're going to take, let's say, 40, and then we just say, okay, the 10K is what we're putting into the note. If it's more of a kind of a rolling dedicated team kind of format, then we just take a look at what this team would cost in the market. We look at other companies, what do they offer similar teams for? And then we say, okay, on every month we give, let's say, I don't know, 2K discount. And then if we assume the relationship is over the course of, let's say, 3 or let's say 6 months, then we just multiply that by however many months. So eventually you're going to come to a point where both sides just have to agree, okay, this seems to be somewhat fair for everybody.
Yeah. Any learnings about types of companies that have worked well for, or not so well, or types of products, types of situations, different stages? What were your kind of heuristics around making some of these decisions?
The earlier, the riskier. Like idea stage is insane, crazy risky. We've actually now launching a new service that's going after more like funded startups, so a little bit later stage, at least seed and beyond. But early stage is crazy risky. People with no experience, typically it's tough for them.
Yeah.
As far as industries, we're pretty industry agnostic. We've done a good amount of blockchain work. We've done pretty much a little bit of everything. So I can't say anything kind of industry specific, but stage-wise and experience is a big plus.
Yeah. Anything about the kind of types of founders that you found, either more successful, less successful, or that you kind of tend to steer towards or away from in terms of just like approach or thinking or personalities? And I'm always curious kind of what people use in terms of qualification criteria or filters that they know tend to work better, like in terms of these customers work out really, really well for us, and these customers tend not to. So how do I prospect and qualify people appropriately? Any learnings there?
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at it kind of from an investment point of view, like if you're an early stage investor and you're trying to get a good return on whatever cash you're putting in, at an early stage, it's a lot more about kind of filtering out the losers rather than cherry picking the winners, because it's simply impossible. Yeah. There's certain patterns that we've seen, certain kind of traits of personality or certain circumstances that have at least somewhat of a higher chance of success. Yeah. Experience is a big one. So if somebody, for example, had an exit before, and we had a couple of companies like that, they just blow mostly everybody out of the water.
Yeah.
If you have people that have experience in a particular industry, let's say as an employee, and then they see a pain point in that industry and then they go out to solve it, they tend to do a lot better. As an example, one of the companies that we're working with is a guy based out of Toronto. He runs a bar. He's run it for 10 years, and he, like all bars do, they have to order beer. Right. So I met with him one day and he showed me the process of ordering beer for a bar, and it's insane. Like it's like a mortgage document, no crazy long, and just a very, very archaic process. And he started a company to simplify the process of ordering beer for bars. And I think like out of the first 15 meetings that he had with breweries, everybody signed on. So too early to tell how they're going to do, but like these kind of situations, we like balanced teams. So solo founders, they have a harder time. Somebody that can sell well is a big plus, especially the CEO position. Eventually, you're going to have to be selling to everybody, right? Yeah. From employees to investors to customers. So those are kind of some of the, I guess, rules of thumb or some of the circumstances that we've seen that have worked out better. But at the end of the day, you just can't predict success.
Well, I think it's correlate. I always think about correlating to success rather than predicting. It's like, can I increase my odds 5-10%? That will give me a good edge. But I like that. I certainly find the certainly accident entrepreneurs. I mean, people that have been through the process once tends to be a huge indicator or a huge correlation to their ability to do it a second time. The sales one, I certainly agree with. I mean, I think that that it is the nature of an early stage CEO to be a salesperson, even selling themselves sometimes on ideas and keeping them motivated and pushing them through. Talk a little bit about your team. So how did you build your team, in terms of the services that you provide? How have you kind of structured yourself? How have you found your talent? How do you organize that talent to be able to work with these different companies and manage things?
Yeah, I mean, I think in any service-based business, planning and having a proper structure is a lot more important than it is for a product-based business. So we've struggled, to some degree in the early days. It gets better with time. You have a bunch of different projects that people are working on, so you have to have kind of a structure on a project-by-project basis as well as more on a high level. We're close to 80 people now, so it's the more you grow, you kind of have to make sure that you have the right processes in place, not grow too fast without having these processes in place and the structure in place. Otherwise, it's just going to be mayhem. But so far, I mean, it seems to be fine. It can always be better, but it's all right.
Anything you think you did either intentionally or serendipitously earlier in the company that has worked well for you? Any kind of learnings that you've been thankful for in terms of how you structured things or approach to running the business?
I mean, there's always, I guess, decisions that you make kind of on the fly. Sometimes you just don't know how they're going to work out. Some work out better, some work out worse. Yeah. Like right now, we're trying to, in any service-based business, you have a problem of capacity, right? Yeah. So resource management, and how do you make sure that people are not too busy and or not busy enough, and kind of structuring that is pretty hard. Making sure that everybody's synced up, all the marketing is synced up with the tech department is synced up with finance. So that's something that's been not easy to work through. But I think comparing service-based businesses to product, if we were, my brother and I, if we were to start a product-based business, I think it will be kind of a lot easier from an operational standpoint. Comparing service-based to product-based businesses is tough. I think one way of looking at it is kind of a product-based business that sells something that's perishable, like milk. Having the proper planning and synchronization is just a lot more important. So that's something that we've always tried to focus on. My brother, he's the CEO of the company, so he's a lot more involved in kind of the operations at a high level. Yeah. I mean, it's a learning process. So.
Yeah, I always found service-based businesses, it's either feast or famine. Like you're never, there's this elusive, momentary, perfect balance, but you're never really on it. You're either flip-flop, you're on one side or the other side, and sometimes you're flip-flopping back and forth. The other challenge I find, you kind of hinted at it, but I think it's important for service-based business, or one of the dynamics in service-based businesses is, whereas there's an absolute capacity limit, meaning that, an individual can only work 10 hours in a day. And so, you can't work, 40 hours on Monday and then, not work the rest of the week. It just, there's a time component to capacity that I think is really part of the service-based business dynamic. And if you can't kind of load balance your demand, like if you can't figure out how to kind of line up your clients in the right way and kind of balance them in the right way, it creates this kind of chaos inside the business where you may have, everyone working, overtime one week and then have no work for them the next week. And getting that sort of the art of balancing demand ends up becoming really hard for service-based businesses. Anything, I guess, one thing that I often see is ways in which they sort of contract with clients or manage engagements with clients to do some of that load balancing. I mean, is there anything about how you manage your projects or how you engage with your clients that allows you to kind of better manage the capacity over time?
For us, it's tricky because we work with startups, and startups, they are pretty unstable. Yeah. So there's, if you look at other, let's say, software consulting companies that work with large enterprise clients, you can plan a lot better with enterprise clients. Right? They have certain budgets allocated, and they have cash. They have certain processes in place, and just a lot more stable. For startups, everything could be great one day, another day they could be going bankrupt. Yeah. We could be planning for, a particular client, let's say a sprint or a development release to happen, let's say within 2 weeks, and then another sprint to start or another big deal to begin. But then all of a sudden funding goes dry. So then a team that we were kind of planning for is now without work. Yeah. So we're always in this kind of situation. That's part of the reason why we're trying to switch over to a little bit later stage companies that have at least raised some cash. Yeah. And we know they're going to be around for, typically at least 2 years. So that should kind of simplify the planning side of things. It helps to have everybody synced up. A lot of the times, even if you have stable clients, if one department doesn't know what the other department is doing, then that could cause a lot of chaos. Yeah. If, for example, marketing gets a new client and then they don't notify the tech department or something of that sort, then they can onboard a new person without actually needing a new person, just as a kind of a bad example. But yeah, I mean, just proper planning is very needed, and proper communication with clients and between everybody within the company.
Yeah. And what are you, I guess, what's your development cycle look like? What kind of rhythm are you generally working on in your projects?
So we follow Scrum, and if we do an MVP, like a very early stage product kind of thing, usually it's a 2 to 3 month build.
Yep.
From pretty much nothing to a ready product that people can launch with. After that, usually we try to switch people over to a dedicated team where we take a look at what their budget is like. Either they raise capital, or maybe they're making some money, or they have a certain budget. We put together a team based on what we've seen before, and then that team works with the founders on a two-week sprint.
Okay, you've got that kind of iterative process in place and working with their clients that way. So you can there's a certain amount of kind of adjustment or ability to kind of right size things on a weekly or two, every other week basis. Makes sense?
Yeah.
And in terms of communication, I mean, we mentioned it a few times. Anything that you've seen particularly successful in how your teams, communicate with clients, either kind of practically, technically, any kind of habits, patterns, rhythms, things that you put in place on your projects that facilitate communication between customer and team?
I think in service-based, unlike product-based, there's a lot less. It's a lot more difficult to standardize things.
Yeah.
You're just like you mentioned, you're dealing with people. Everybody works differently. Some people are more calm than others. Some people are more blunt than others. And there's just a lot more variables that come into play. So when it comes to communication, I think a good rule of thumb is to double check or to double confirm something rather than kind of have a couple of weeks or a couple of months to go by and then people be disappointed or surprised.
Yeah.
That something happened. If you're making any sort of changes or anything that could be iffy, better to get that in writing, or at least better to send an email after, let's say, a call to kind of confirm and make sure everybody's synced up so you can refer back to it if something goes wrong. Those are kind of some of the, let's say, basic things that have helped us.
Yeah, I always say don't assume, and to assume makes an ass out of you and me. to pull apart the word a little bit. I think I think a lot of these translate into basically any types of services, but certainly technical services where you're doing fairly detailed work, and oftentimes I find clients, clients don't appreciate or don't really understand a lot of the technical kind of complexity and the dynamics that are happening. So for technologists to try to explain in business terms what the decision, what are the options and what is the decision kind of criteria, and if you're going to go it that way, here are the risks and considerations. That's often quite complex. So a lot of the times it's really just assessing how much the client really understands how they're answering or what they're answering to. So yeah, kind of double, triple checking on those things and then following up seems prudent options. So let's talk a little bit about where you're going with the business now. So we spoke earlier, and you mentioned you're putting together, or you're working to put together some investment or put together a fund. I guess what's prompted that, or now that you've kind of taken the business to this level, what has been the interest in putting together an investment fund, and what's the strategy there? On
one hand, we've been investing, kind of making non-cash investments in forms of services. So we have the experience of at least some experience that investors do in a sense of sourcing deals, vetting deals, seeing how deals turn out that are on paper one thing, and then how they actually turn out in real life. On another hand, we've realized that if we actually want to make money, make serious money from equity, then we wouldn't be able to. It's all about selection. Like when it comes down to any sort of investment or picking a company, it's not really so much about what sort of help you give this company. It's about the type of people that you actually choose to put in your cash into, or whatever you make any sort of investment into. Yeah. As an example, you take a look at Y Combinator, you take any company that went through Y Combinator into almost any accelerator in the world, they're going to do well, right? Or you take any sort of Harvard student, you put them in any college, they're going to do well. It's not so much about Harvard or so much about a Y Combinator or the services they offer. It's more about the selection process of the people that are actually in the program. So we realized for us to be able to get these kind of people, we wouldn't be able to get them on the terms that we have, which is cash and equity. We had to actually do something just straight for equity without expecting any sort of cash from them. So the idea of raising a fund and actually investing into companies, that's kind of where it all started. And then the idea of investing in previously exited founders exclusively was as I mentioned kind of before the recording, one part of that was intuitive, in the sense that somebody has done something that you want them to do, which is to have an exit before. There's a much higher chance that they'll do it again. There's insane amounts of research that actually supports that. People that had exits much more likely to have another exit. Usually their later exits are much higher than previous exits. Investors that fund previous exit founders, they have much better return, both on a deal-by-deal basis as well as a fund-by-fund basis. So a lot of research, and just made sense to go in that direction. We haven't seen anybody that does this exclusively. Mm-hmm. So I think most investors, they want to fund previous exit founders, but there's not anybody out there that actually does that exclusively. And the reason being is very few people can actually get in on these kind of deals. I mean, there's not a lot of exit founders out there, relatively speaking, compared to the number of startups that are as a whole. Not a lot of people get in on these rounds. The reason being is that if you had an exit, you have options. Right? Not like your average entrepreneur, usually you're chasing investors, but if you're an exit founders, a lot of the times investors are chasing you. So you have a lot of options. You're going to go with somebody that either you know personally, or maybe they funded your previous companies, and everybody else are going to be stuck out of luck. So the idea from our side of things is we're not going to be offering them cash, even though we're raising a fund, but the idea is we're going to be able to offer them an environment where they can pressure test ideas. So somebody that's had an exit, they're probably, they go through a pretty similar cycle. They're kind of take some downtime. They may be stuck with an acquirer for a little bit, then they travel, then they give back, but eventually they're going to do another startup.
Yeah.
Most people. So what we're offering them is we're offering this sort of studio model where they come in with us for 3 months. They come in with an idea. We help them to pressure test this idea to see if there's any market need for it, meaning we build an MVP for them. We help them launch it. They see there's a market need. Then they make a decision. Okay, is this something that I actually want to dive headfirst into or not? So it's even though, yes, it is a fund, it's a non-traditional fund in the sense that we're not writing any check. We're putting this into this sort of studio-like model.
Yeah, I like it. I'm curious to see how it plays out. Andrew, this has been a pleasure. If people want to find out more about you, about StartupSoft, your kind of future investment fund here and stuff, the studio, what's the best way to get a hold of you or get more information?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Vasylyk, or LinkedIn, Andrew Vasylyk. For StartupSoft, you can check us out at startupsoft.org. Great.
I'll make sure that those links are in the show notes. Andrew, thank you again. This has been a pleasure. It's fun to talk to someone who's been through that tech service cycle before. Lots of familiar kind of patterns, familiar experiences. So I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for taking some time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bruce.
You've been listening to Scaling Up Services with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at scalingupservices.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at scalingupservices.com/newsletter.